I love the beach. The beach is my happy place. I was married at the beach at sunrise. What is it about the beach that's so alluring? Is it the smell of the salty air? Maybe it's the feel of the wind in your face and the sound the waves make as they crash. Maybe it's standing in the surf and feeling the sand and the water tugging at your ankles. Maybe it's the existential acknowledgement of how vast the world is. That small amount of ocean that you're in contact with expands across the globe and thousands of feet down. Or maybe it's the outstanding amount of biodiversity present at the junction between the land and the sea. One of the reasons I can spend hours on the shore is hunting for life or signs of life in the swash zone, which is that area where the waves are coming up and going back down. For example, when we visited the beach in 2019, a loggerhead sea turtle laid her eggs in front of the cottage where we were staying. I also love hunting for seashells. So over many years and many trips to the beach, I've found many different kinds of seashells. This includes slipper shell, a shark eye or moon snail shell. What's interesting about this is you can actually see the hole that some other creature made in this shell that ultimately led to this guy's demise. Have a whelk shell here as well. Some more common shells that you may see, these are arc shells. Have a lettered olive shell here, as well as a scallop, and one of my personal favorites, an Atlantic kitten paw shell. Although seashells are often thought about as an animal's home, they're actually part of the animal's body, and shells belong to a specific group of animals called the mollusks. An exception would be hermit crabs. They aren't mollusks after all. What they do is that they find an empty shell on the beach and they move into it. Shells are a sign of sea life that has died, but there are plenty of signs of living organisms as well if you know where to look. Railroad vine grows along the beaches in Florida. Crabs live in the shore. You can see ghost crabs wandering around at night, or you can sometimes see them poke out of their holes during the day. The feelers of mole crabs sticking up. These are to grab a passing bite to eat as waves go over. Or in this case, this is a mole crab that was grabbed as a snack by a white ibis. Looking offshore, maybe you'll see a marine mammal like a manatee or a bottlenose dolphin. If you look up, what do you see there? Can you see an osprey? Ospreys are also called fish hawks. Maybe you can see a pelican. You don't have to go to the beach to see so much biodiversity or various forms of life either. If you were to go outside right now, what would you see? How many different living things could you count? How many different plants, animals, or signs of life? It doesn't have to be seashells after all. Is there something eating your plants? Do you see scat or animal feces? Maybe animal hair? Maybe something like snakeskin? Where does the diversity of life on Earth come from? It comes from evolution. Evolution is the process that makes new species. Maybe you've heard of Pokemon evolution before. Pokemon, or pocket monsters, are a fictional group of organisms that gamers collect in a virtual imaginary world. Pokemon have become a huge franchise, including video games, movies, and trading cards. So in the game, individual Pokemon evolve to become more sophisticated Pokemon, such as we have Poliwag evolving to Poliwhirl, and finally we have Poliwrath. Or maybe we have, from the second generation of Pokemon, we have Cyndaquil becoming Quilava. Or probably the most famous Pokemon of all, we have Pikachu evolving into Raichu. Although Pokemon evolution may be familiar to us, this isn't actually how biological evolution works. Biological evolution deals with changes across an entire population, whereas Pokemon evolution occurs at the level of an individual. The individual changes over time, and there's no reproduction. With biological evolution, as mentioned in Course 1, reproduction is required. At the fundamental level, evolution is descent with modification. Descent refers to reproduction or passing on of genes. Modification refers to changes to those genes. We talked about gene mutations, for example, in Course 2. So descent with modification means changes in DNA that are passed down from one generation to the next. DNA mutations are random, but evolution is not a random process. DNA mutations produce genetic diversity, and genetic diversity is important because then it can allow for new phenotypes to appear. Remember, phenotypes are the visible traits that we see. Some phenotypes can confer some kind of advantage that then makes it easier for animals to pass on their genes. For example, blind cave fish possess a genetic mutation that led to the loss of their eyes. This occurred because of a random mutation that caused eye loss in a population of fish that were living inside a cave. Since eyes are not needed in a dark environment and eyes are costly to produce and maintain, a fish with no eyes was able to reproduce better than a fish with eyes. Reproduction means passing on genes, so fish with no eyes were selected for over time until a new species of fish, the blind cave fish, emerged. New phenotypes aren't always good, and if they don't contribute to enhanced reproductive success, they won't be selected for. Let's bring evolution back to our daily lives. Have you seen signs like this at your doctor's office before about antibiotics? That they don't treat the flu or the common cold, which are both caused by viruses. Or maybe you've seen a sticker on a prescription of antibiotics about making sure that you always finish the full prescription, even if you feel better. The reason for these educational campaigns is to minimize the evolution and consequent expansion of so-called superbacteria. Overuse and inappropriate use of antibiotics drives the evolution of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It's the same kind of examples with our cave fish. Random genetic mutations produce antibiotic-resistant phenotypes, just like random mutations resulted in blind fish. Treatment with antibiotics kills the bacteria without the antibiotic-resistant genes. And the bacteria that are left are the ones who are more resistant. These bacteria get selected for and are more likely to reproduce and pass on the antibiotic-resistant gene. This is how so-called superbacteria such as methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, came to be. MRSA tends to be more of an issue in facilities like hospitals or assisted living facilities because of the high use of antimicrobial cleaners. What we see in both of these examples is a process called natural selection. Although the genetic mutations that lead to natural selection are random, natural selection is not a random process. Natural selection has resulted in a lot of very interesting phenotypes, something we'll explore more in the biodiversity section in the next module. For example, the hollow bones of birds facilitates their ability to fly, or the leaf-like appearance of katydids, or the elaborate reproductive structures of flowering plants. One important thing to remember about natural selection is that it does not ever produce a final perfect species, but rather the species that is best for that time under the given constraints. Let's explore this more by looking at the peppered moths. Peppered moths can be black or white, and up until the mid-1800s, most were white. However, by the early 1900s, most were black. Why is that? Why did this happen? What happened during this 50-year period? So think back to your history classes. What happened during this period was the Industrial Revolution. So now we have an increase in factories, which leads to an increase in pollution. And that pollution is going to leave a film on these trees and make them dark with soot. And so there are now more dark moths. But why are there more dark moths? Is this a form of camouflage? Were they getting dirty like the trees from the pollution? Or is it a change in gene frequencies and evolution? So let's take a look at a bird's eye view of this phenomenon. Now we're going to look at a simulation showing why natural selection was occurring and how it was occurring with the peppered moths. So let's start with prior to the Industrial Revolution, when it was a light-colored forest. So you can see here we're the bird, and we're looking at a tree bark, and you can see where these different moths are sitting. So from this view, there's a moth. I'm going to eat that one. So you see the light-colored moth is harder to see, and there's also a light-colored moth there that's harder to see as well. So if I go around, and my goal is just to eat as many moths as I can. So we have a few more seconds left, it looks like, on our timer. So again, this is exactly how it works in real life, where we have the predator flying around. All right, So we started with 50% light moths and 50% dark moths. So in the light-colored forest, now there are 64% light moths and 36% dark moths. Because as a predator, we could see the dark moths easier. We were more likely to eat them than the light moths, which is why there's less dark moths overall. Now let's contrast what we just did with the light forest with the dark forest. So this is after the Industrial Revolution. So now our tree bark is dark because they're covered in pollution and soot. And so now when we fly around, it's much easier to go after the light moths. Is that? No, I guess that's not a dark moth. So at home, you could probably be just saying, oh, you're supposed to look there for the moth, because you can see them and I can't. It's like a real-life game show here. Oh, there's one. So now you can see that we have 44% light moths and 56% dark moths, although we would actually predict that there would be fewer dark moths than light moths. But like anything else in life, nothing is perfect. We do note here that with the darker colored forest, we do see fewer dark moths compared to with our light colored forest. So let's recap from the simulation. The change in the peppered moth's appearance was due to natural selection. The darker moths suddenly had an advantage over the lighter moths that led to increased fitness, or an increased ability to reproduce. This phenomenon wasn't unique to just the peppered moths either. This occurred with over 100 different species of moths. In fact, scientists adopted a name especially for this phenomenon, industrial melanism. Over the last 50 years, with increased reform efforts to curb pollution, can you predict what happened to the moths? Now they're swinging back, and they're more lighter colored moths again, as things are being cleaned up. Alright, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about another form of natural selection called sexual selection. Sexual selection is when specialty traits evolve, even if these traits could contribute to decreased survival. Sexual selection can be driven either by male competition, such as male bighorn sheep fighting for the right to reproduce with a female, or by female choice, such as in the case of many bird species, including peacocks. Now, Charles Darwin, who formally proposed natural selection for the first time in his book on the origin of species, had a bit of a problem with peacocks. Interestingly, the problem he had with peacocks is another example of how culture influences the process of science. When considering a male peacock, it seems like having such an elaborate tail should result in decreased fitness. They're very energetically costly to make and to maintain, and it seems like it'd be a real liability when trying to get away from a predator. But to Victorians, such as Darwin, it was insurmountable to consider that something as biologically important as evolution could really be driven by something like female choice. Biologists have since studied the mating habits of peacocks, and the more elaborate the male's tail, the more of those eye spots, the more females are interested in mating. The elaborate tails are an outward show of a healthy, fit male. Traits like fancy tails or colorful feathers or dances or constructing elaborate structures like bowerbirds were selected over many generations of choosy females as being an accurate and outward sign of fitness among males. Since females typically invest more in their offspring, it also makes sense that female choice drives sexual selection and not male choice. A third type of selection is called artificial selection. This is also called selective breeding. This is a human-driven process of breeding specific plants or animals together to generate different traits. For example, going from wolves to all the different kinds of domesticated dog breeds that we now see today. Relating this back to course 2, genetically modifying organisms was a way of speeding up the selective breeding process. In closing, evolution is descent with modification. It occurs at the level of the species and not at the level of the individual. Said otherwise, biological evolution is not the same as Pokemon evolution. Random mutations lead to both genetic and phenotypic diversity, and phenotypes that confer some kind of an advantage that leads to increased reproductive success are selected for, ultimately resulting in evolution and the generation of new species.